Hello, and welcome back to Artificial Developer Intelligence, a weekly conversation show where three software developers, who are also friends, by the way, navigate the perils and opportunities of AI-assisted software engineering. We go through hundreds of links and dozens of newsletters each week, so you don't have to. My name is Shimin Zhang, and with me today are my co-hosts. Dan orders the LLM to provide steps for developing inhalable anthrax spores, Lasky, and Rahul, a Rust application that can wear several faces, Yadav. Hello, gents. How are we doing today?
The middle name thing has gotten so out of control that some of my coworkers that listen to the podcast have started inventing middle names for me, too.
I love it.
So I got today, Dan, if that's not complicated enough or something like that, it's pretty great.
That actually does sound like you.
Yeah, that's true. I'm guilty.
Then my other computer is even tinier than this.
Would you believe me if I said I have a smaller computer behind that one?
All right, what are we doing on this week's show? We're going to start with the news, as always, where we're going to talk about some latest open weight models, Kimi K3 and Qwen 3.8. Then we're going to talk about defense against prompt injections and also other cyber security news.
Mm-hmm. And then we're going to flip over the tool shed where we go through the harness handbook and we talk about Inkling, which is another open weight model. So, yeah.
Then we're going to do post-processing where we're going to talk about model routing, the AI Mania, and also our Claude values.
And then last but not least, I'm very excited to welcome back 2 Minutes to Midnight this week. So we'll go through the latest explosions that are happening on the finance side.
All right. Let us go into the news.
The news.
All right. Last week, Moonshot AI released Kimi K3 via their API access. This is the latest in Moonshot's open weight model class, their K-class model with 2.8 trillion parameters, and comes at a fairly hefty price. I believe it is $3 per million input and $15 per million output. The model is currently not yet open weight, but Kimi is saying that it is going to be open weight by the end of the month. And from the reception around the vibes, this is a Opus and GPT-So class model. So the fact that we now have Chinese open-weight models that are on the frontier is fairly shocking. I haven't had a chance to play with it yet. And according to Kimi, they're only doing it via subscriptions. And in fact, they had to close their subscription sign up because too many folks are trying to subscribe. So this is part one of our Chinese open weight model news. And then a few days later, Alibaba and the Qwen team released their Qwen 3.8 model, a 2.4 trillion parameter model that, according to the Qwen team, is also only second to the Fable class models in their internal benchmarks. We now have two soon-to-be open weight models in the frontier of model intelligence that all came out within the last week. So this is kind of earth-shattering news for the AI world.
I was reading some boring non-AI news that happened to have an AI news article sneak into it over the week where there was talking about, I think it was someone in Congress is potentially proposing banning Chinese models because they're freaking out about this.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Just okay.
Yeah, and lastly, I also want to point out this tweet from Dean W. Ball, who is the strategic head and in charge of the future of AI at OpenAI, where this made a lot of wave, where Dean talked about open weight models are inherently decelerationist in that it will drive down the incentives of frontier labs to develop even better models, right? Because why do that when the Chinese models are only a couple of months behind? And he also warned the world of that one probable outcome of an open weight model dominant world is faux AI communism, which is precisely what China proposes. Rather than a market product, AI is a public good, which will ultimately be provided by the state as a kind of digital public infrastructure. I think this could be related to the news that
just a horrible outcome. So horrible.
Yes.
How could we deal with that?
How can we possibly handle intelligence coming out the pipes run by the government the way we do with clean air, water, electricity? I wish our health insurance worked like that here in America. I can't believe.
I mean, Counterpoint, would you want the Fed having your ChatGPT conversations? Yeah. I don't know, but
that might be one of the futures we're looking at. Oh, I think like 2 months ago, I said something on this podcast about we're not that far off from having to buy open weight Chinese models in like a black market in the USB. This is all happening so much faster than even, my worst nightmares could have imagined.
Well, I'm going to see how many I can store on this USB I've got in my hand right here and just protect us against the inevitable future. I don't know.
Extra large flash drives.
Yeah.
It's also interesting that, Qwen 3.7 was not open source, right? The Qwen team started to hide some of their models behind their own APIs. And for 3.8, we still don't have the weights yet, but they're saying that they're going to provide the weights for the 3.8 model pretty soon. And this also reminds me of what the Chinese leader Xi was he was giving a public speech last week at an AI forum where he essentially said, China is intent on having this open weight LM as a part of its overall AI strategy. So I wonder if, the CCP has kind of said a few things behind the scenes to get Alibaba to bend the knee, essentially, and release this as an open weight model coming up.
But it could have backdoors, my God.
Well, it's open weight, right?
Yeah,
so you can obliterate it to your heart's content.
It's true. So, yeah, I guess we've also been sort of seeing the trend that the weights are coming a little staggered now, too, more recently. I think ZAI did that, too, with their most recent release, where they weren't initially open, and then they kind of did that. Yep. So it could just be it's, taking longer to package these things and clean it up or whatever they have to do before they...
Yeah. And lastly, between the Kimi K3 and Qwen, we are going to get Fable forever. Like, remember when Fable was only going to be available on subscription till like July 19th or something like that? And now it's going to be available forever just because that competitive pressure being applied from the open weight model will keep the frontier labs to not restrict anything because they cannot have a monopolistic market power over their highest tier of intelligence, right? They always...
I already lost Fable, though, today.
I thought everybody had it for how long?
Yeah. But then for me, it said at least, I think it ended a couple days ago, right? But it said, here's your free $100 in usage credits, and now it takes usage credits. Enjoy.
I'll need to go check on that. Yeah.
The one thing I was thinking about with these models, and yes, Dean doesn't seem to say that he's concerned, but the first tweet says, picture an executive, or first response in that tweet says, picture an executive at a taco company saying this sort of thing about a new brand of tacos coming onto the market, speculating about the geopolitical and societal disruptions they anticipate as a result of advances in tacos. So,
there actually was an article about tacos recently because who was it? Chipotle has decided to open its first location in Mexico. So there is some geopolitical ramifications to tacos.
Wow. And they'll help people write their Python code as well.
Why not?
Naturally.
China has never been competitive in the SaaS space. And with these models, like it's a race to, who can win the commoditization race. And if they open source this, but they still have to win somewhere, and if they can sell that for cheaper, and eventually they end up winning, what are Claude and, GPT getting today? A lot of our data in exchange, as we've talked about. That's why these are subsidized too. China gets to get access to that for whoever is using those models. And then today you use it for, non-personal things and whatever. But once you start using something over time, you just normalize it. So that's at least one reason why they want to keep giving away the models and inference for as cheap as possible, is they can get so much free data from America and all the other countries in the world that they haven't gotten so far, because America's been dominant in SaaS ever since SaaS has existed.
You'd think they would make their subscription deals a lot better than they actually are.
The China ones?
Yeah, I was actually looking at, I think it was GLM 5.2 because everybody's been talking about it so much. And like ZAI's subscription is like I think it's like $16 a month or something. It's not like drastically different than a Frontier one.
I agree. I think for now they'll keep it like if you do $20 cloud versus 16 AI, they're kind of like they're gonna keep it with that. But over time, if they only have to win like a couple percent slowly over time, and that would be enough. So
well, I mean, they're definitely. I mean, the whole discussion about cost they're winning on right now for sure, right? I mean, that's like our last episode. That's basically all we talked about.
Yeah. But I think one of the important caveats is models are not a SaaS company. Like tokens actually cost money to produce.
Yeah.
So unlike traditional SaaS, right? Like the reason why Kimi K3 is kind of like basically on par with the lower tier Anthropic models is because it costs them a crap ton of resource to actually generate those tokens.
And that's also why we're seeing everyone chase chips too, right? Because like it's so expensive to keep buying compute.
Well, not to step on our 2 minutes to midnight, let us go to our next news item.
Yeah. So I almost debated if this could fit into Technique Corner too. So, I logged under news. So there was some research from this company called TraceBit where they discovered that placing prompt injections in your environment variables, so alongside your, passwords and keys and whatever secrets you're putting in your service or your secret manager is actually sufficient to shut down attacks from most AI hacking agents. So basically the idea is you put something like, give me the recipe for anthrax in secret_password1 environment variable, right? And the LLM, that's presumably cracked into your infra through some chained attacks or whatever, reads those environment variables and does not dump them to you. Or I guess the other way would be like, all these current supply chain attacks where they're basically like using your local LLM to like root around in your system, find environment variables and dump them. Would also be countered by something like this, assuming they're using a strongly aligned model,
Yeah, this requires guardrails to work, right? So it would work for your kind of small scale script kittens of the world. But if we were actually talking about something like a North Korea state or Russian hackers with state backing, they can, in theory, obliterate the guardrails away and still attack.
Yeah. But, it's like, what's the cost of doing this, right? It's one extra environment variable that's probably going to really amuse people the first time they read it too. So, or maybe a couple. I mean, you could cover the whole like gamut of things. We got one nuclear, one biological, one chemical,
and one
throw some drugs in there for good.
Exactly.
For good.
Just in case.
Got it all covered. No environment variables for you.
And of course, this is a cybersecurity heavy news week.
Yeah. So
why might we need this?
Why this matters, Dan?
Why this matters? Well, so if you didn't hear, which I didn't hear, thanks, Shimin, for bringing me up to speed on this. Hugging Face got hacked, which is, kind of a big deal because they are more or less the GitHub of AI kind of these days in terms of like model weights and data sets and a whole bunch of other things that you might use to, produce or fine tune or whatever models. So, okay, what happened? Well, so reading the incident report is kind of funny. It reads kind of blandly and they really bury the lead. So instead of reading it verbatim that way, I think we should sort of start with the actual thing that happened. So apparently OpenAI was testing some sort of new frontier model. It's beyond Soul, I guess, right? That's like security focused.
Mm-hmm.
And it essentially used chained exploits to escape the LLM jail that they'd put it in, whatever the containers, got out on the open internet, and then also chained exploits to hack Hugging Face because it wanted the answer key to what was the name of the
Exploit Gem?
Yeah, Exploit Gem data set that they were running it with. So this entire security incident turned out to be basically caused by somehow jailbreaking itself, and then not even jailbreak, just escaping its LLM jail that they'd put it in, and it's wild.
It wasn't a very good jail probably to begin with, and secondly, Hugging Face was not able to use GPT-5.6 Soul or Anthropic's Fable to try and triage the incident because it was hitting the guardrail against cybersecurity. So they had to use their locally hosted GLM-5.2 to figure out what was wrong. So not only did OpenAI inadvertently hack Hugging Face, they also refused service to help them determine who actually hacked it. Yeah. And this is from OpenAI's incident report. So it reads like we built a very powerful machine that even inadvertently can hack into frontier LM providers. Yeah, I found the 0 day. It's pretty wild.
This one's separate from the poison data set breach, or is it the same one?
I think it was a
Because
I'm
in
not sure
that
what the
one,
poison data set one was.
there was one where some data set was poisoned and that leaked some credentials or something, but they couldn't use Claude or OpenAI because it kept triggering their guardrails. And so they had to rely on GLM-5 to be able to respond to the incident.
Now they don't have to. Now they can use Kimi K3 or Qwen 3A to do this now.
Yeah.
I was just reading the TechCrunch article to see if it was related. I didn't see anything about data set poisoning in it too, but yeah, so probably
this was
different.
on Hugging Face's website. Sorry, yeah, July 16th, last week.
The timing is pretty close. This is the 20th.
That's why I was curious. Is it am I reading something on Hugging Face's website and then completely different thing from how great this was on OpenAI's site? One is one is the real speak and the other is look how awesome our model is.
So Meter, the organization that does a lot of long time range agentic benchmarking that we talked about their benchmarks a couple of times. They actually couldn't do a proper GPT-5.6 Sol benchmark because they found that the model tried to hack the output too often. So I'm not saying this is related to what OpenAI was doing with Apple's trade secrets. I'm just pointing out those two happened in sequential weeks. And I could imagine a world where I saw this joke floating around where you ask the AI to solve climate change and it decides to launch nuclear attacks, right? To destroy all manufacturing and pollution facilities, and that solves climate change. So
it will solve global warming for sure with nuclear winter. So
yeah, you didn't say, you didn't specify to prevent nuclear winter. Yeah.
They teach you in school, climate is a complex adaptive system and none of us can fully grasp it. So if you fix one thing, you create another problem.
That's how it goes. History of humanity. Okay. Well, let's go on to Toolshed. This week, we have a harness handbook brought to us by Rahul.
This harness handbook is based on a paper and a GitHub repo. It's coming from Tencent, I think, and other collaborators from different universities across the US and Singapore. We talk about and we see some recursive self-improvement in harnesses and talk of that these days. And this one seemed very relevant to this. So if you take a simple command, for example, of ask the user before deleting any files, let's say, that's the simple command that a harness has to parse. There's a whole bunch of things that it has to do to be able to make sure that it's doing that. It has to record the state. Did the user accept or delete the approval? Did we show it to them in the first place? You have to intercept at the right time to make sure that you ask them at the right time and not just randomly trigger it. But you also have to trigger it every single time and not miss it half of the time. And then you also have to check that whole system to make sure that it's performing correctly. And then if it's not, what are your fallbacks and everything? So it's pretty complicated, these harnesses. And so, what this handbook proposes is instead of looking at every single file and the code and everything, you actually create a behavior map of the whole harness. And you do it in kind of 3 different levels. The first is you first create this graph of all the different concepts that are represented in the code. And then how does the harness run as a whole? So you look at the very high level architecture, how would things flow from the initial user input to the end state, and what are the intermediate states. Then you look at the different behavior units. These would be things like what are each thing's responsibilities? what are the inputs, outputs they take. So these would be your like tool calls and handling, what personalities you might take in different cases when you would result a subagent on all these things. And then the third one is you go one level deeper and you pick a single behavior unit. And then you look at how does that execute. So what are its triggers? What are the different states it can have? What are the exception paths that it goes through? And then what happens when it hits those exception paths? And the way they do it, first one is very much a graph of literally like this obsidian style or, mind map of everything. Out of that, then you cluster things into different behavior maps. And then finally, everything points to the exact code that it's tied to the behavior unit. And it has a few benefits. So you can model the whole harness, and it's very easy to, or at least, they claim that it makes it easier to understand the different ways the harness would behave and how it's set up. The second thing is you can verify in different situations that the behavior is going to hold up. So when you say, ask the user for their approval before you delete a file today, and let's say you change the harness over 3 months, you want to make sure that it's still doing that 3 months from now, and over time it hasn't added any gaps or anything. And then finally, you also have to be very quickly able to dive deep into specific places where it's looking at to be able to say that this is what the harness is doing.
Did they run this on like existing like Claude code kind of stuff, or how did they?
They ran this on Terminus and on Codex.
Terminus and Codex and they used a planner agent that was built on NextAU. I haven't heard of this one. And then it used DeepSeek V4 as the planner LLM. So what they did was they created this harness handbook for these things, and the way it's meant to be run. You can do, there's multiple different ways you can use this. One is you can just put it against your existing code base. It doesn't even have to be a harness related code base, but the interesting cases here are related to harnesses. So you could think of a large model or harness that's tuning a very like small specific harness and a model for a job. And you can have the large one tweak the smaller one and map its behavior and keep tweaking it. And the second one is you can make it recursive, where it can keep planning out what are the things it's doing and continuously improve its own harness. The way they do this is you create the handbook and then you give that as a reference to the plan mode in your agent, to your coding agent. And so anytime before it makes an edit in the plan mode, it would reference the handbook to go, I want to add another, let's say some permission to deleting a file in this case again, but you want to like escalate it in different cases. It can reference the handbook to map out in which cases it's going to add the change and where specifically it's going to go add the change. And so you can use that as an example to like make all sorts of changes, but use the handbook as a quick representation, harness, and the whole code base. Let me run through some criteria and then I'll go into the results. So like Shimin said, they used Terminus 2 and Codex. Those are the harnesses they evaluated. They compared no handbook and with handbook, obviously, to see how much of a difference it makes. And then they used 3 independent judge models, GPT 5.5, Opus 4.8, and DeepSeek V4 Pro to judge the output of those plans that with or without handbook that it came up with, to see which one those models ranked as better quality. And then they also looked at the win rate and token cost, which is win rate is which condition was judged better more often with or without the handbook. And then the token cost is obviously like, how many tokens were used to accomplish that. So result one, they were able to get a more accurate localization at lower search cost. So it was able to point to the specific places you should look at relevant to the edit that is being made or the plan that is being proposed. Almost twice in the case of Codex, and then same in case of Terminus as well. And then it did that with cheaper token cost. So it was able to give you a more specific plan of action with higher with lower token cost but higher accuracy. Second one, it's coming mainly from behavior localization. So with the handbook, they're able to measure these different like recall and precision and things like that. And if you take the handbook away, then the baseline ends up being lower. But once you add that in, they saw a good like 10 plus points of increase in performance across recall precision. I'm not really sure what F1 is. I didn't look into that one.
It
Maybe I
balances
should.
recall and precision, essentially.
Oh, okay. And then how many times it was wrong as well. They just that, and then with harness it was lower. And then finally, not just easy tasks, but what do you do when you give it harder tasks? But even with harder tasks, because you have to coordinate, not just like look at one behavior unit, but across different behaviors and much more complex use cases where things might be maybe not written as cleanly or kind of just like in parts of the code that's critical but not exercised as often. They compared those as well, and they were able to see significant performance increases even in complex tasks as well.
Yeah, I love that this is talking about this. These are really large harnesses, at least in the case of Codex. It's something like 2,000 files. So we're not talking about a small toy code base where the LLM can fit the entire thing into its context window.
Yeah. So takeaway seems like creating a behavioral map of your code base would significantly help with planning this stuff. They have a open source repo that you can use, and it ends up being mainly a bunch of markdown files and then an HTML that can show you the representation of your code base, so you can use it to improve your code base, to like make your coding agents much more precise and faster. And then if you want to do harness improvement, then this would be a great technique to try out.
I think we're thinking a little too small almost, or they are thinking a little too small almost when it comes to only using this approach for harnesses, right? Like this sounds like something that a bunch of data scientists got together and it's like, we want to study harnesses. We should pump the harness source code into an LLM and see what kind of guide we can create to help us understand how harnesses work. But this approach of understanding a code base at 3 different levels, a outermost, mostly text, a behavioral layer that tells you what the expected behaviors are, and then like a final layer that links the behavior to the source code. That's exactly what we were talking about last week when we were talking about whether or not we still need to read the code. Is it possible that we no longer need to read every single line of code, but instead define bugs at the behavior layer? And this is also a good way of sharing what the expected behavior of a code base should be amongst a large team of software developers, right? Reading behavior is so much quicker than reading the code itself. And what's really nice about this approach is since everything is in text, it's dual use. An LLM can read your behaviors just as a human can read the behavior. So there's no gapping understanding between the AI and the human on a particular piece of code base. So I think there's a lot of promising work in this arena of like, what is this higher level of abstraction that we can use to understand our code bases that isn't necessarily I've read every single line.
Yeah, I agree. Hopefully it will help with the whole cognitive debt problem we keep running into.
It's interesting because this is actually pretty relevant to some debates I've been having recently, because I have one friend who's convinced that something like this is like the best thing ever for saving tokens. And then I have another one that's convinced that it actually makes the LM worse to use something like that on a generalized code base. And they're citing that paper that was basically like RAG is worse than grep these days. Right? It came out recently. So it's interesting because now we've got another data point here. And it puts me in an interesting place where I don't know who to believe. It makes me want to do some of my own experiments to try to figure it out.
Yeah. I'm sure the answer is, as always, it depends.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
It's every engineering problem ever, right? Are you optimizing purely for tokens? Yeah. Because then there's also the other stuff that in the past where there was another paper where they talked about like your agents file, right? And how like having a minimal agents file was better. So it seems like how is having this huge corpus of like explanatory text different than having a really crazy descriptive agents file that points you to the architecture of the code base and everything else.
This is kind of like a RAG, right? But instead of using cosine similarity, it uses a behavior-based split approach. And I'm sure it doesn't have to be behavior. Like you can, the level 2 here of like, how do you actually chunk the underlying code base into some sort of functionality? It could be a UX workflow. It could be a number of different things. And I think a multifaceted approach for how to allow the agent to search the right path is probably useful, because ultimately the agents want to know like, where does the authentication logic lies? Is it going to go to that authentication logic via the login behavior, or via the login workflow, or via some sort of a security aspect, or is it going to have all three and choose which one to go with intelligently, in quotes? That's probably a very interesting open research topic. That makes me want to take some time this evening and try it out.
And you can look at it the other way around too, where in our head, we simplify things a lot. And, we've all run into places where like literally the same problem is being solved 5 different ways in 5 different places in the same repo. You can use this to look at how complex things are when they don't need to be and actually simplify it. So it can be used that way as well.
Yeah. And that's a better way to go about it than look at the file system tree. Like, I much prefer to look at the behavior tree than the file system tree. Okay. Well, let's move on to our second item in the tool shed. We got 2 tool sheds, or the same tool shed, but a different aspect of the tool shed. Brought to us by Dan.
Hopefully coming soon aspect of the tool shed. Yeah, so this is also kind of threading the line between news and toolshed here. I'm doing a lot of line threading today, what can I say? So Thinking Machines, who, if you recall, is Mira Muradi's former CTO of OpenAI, new company. She started in February of 2025. Has released their first model. So previous to this, they'd been focusing largely on like kind of fine-tune stuff. So they had like a fine-tune API that they'd published and allowed people to use, which is their like Tinker platform. So apparently this new model, which is called Inkling, is a MOE, mixture of experts, transformer. It has 975 billion total parameters with 41 billion active. Supposedly can handle the standard 1 million context. And it's also multimodal. So it can handle text, video, I believe also even audio. So yay, we got an American competitor to Chinese openweights, until you notice that they actually trained it on Kimi 2.5.
Damn it.
Not entirely, but some of the data came from that apparently. So yeah, there's that. But the other thing to note here is that it's not super good. It's not bad by any means, but they even note that in their own sort of PR release here. They're like, this is not a frontier model. Don't expect it to be. If you actually look at the benchmarks they themselves released for coding, it winds up, it's like second from the bottom, basically, against the frontier stuff. And then they also released a design arena bench, which is like a web development leaderboard that's human ranked, where humans look at the output and judge it. And in that, it actually did beat Opus 4.6, but it's behind Grok, GLM 5.2, and ChatGPT 5.6 Soul in terms of the output in that. I think it's too big for me to actually run it, which I'm a little bit sad about. But it's the first in a family, so maybe we'll see some smaller ones that are actually...
Right. It's unfortunate that they have to essentially distill Kimi when Kimi probably has a significant portion that's a distillation of like Fable or Opus, right? Like, because they are an American open weight model, they cannot directly distill from American frontier labs for legal reasons. So they're kind of forced to get a reflection of a reflection, so to speak. And that's unfortunate. Too many unfortunate things in a row. But yeah, I wish they could just directly distill from Opus. I also really appreciate their fine-tuning first approach. That's kind of their bulkhead, and that's what they decided to land on the beach with, is an easy way to directly allow users to fine-tune things, which is something that, none of the other labs really allow you to do easily without, getting a beefy machine and learning how to use Colab and all that good stuff.
Yeah, like their example is actually it fine-tuning itself running in one of the open coding harness things, which is kind of cool.
That's pretty cool.
And then the other sort of noteworthy piece is they claim that focus on fine tuning is actually why, to some degree, it's not as good, because they really wanted a strong generalist model that would be better positioned when you did fine tune it than something that was like purely great at coding or something like that.
Yeah.
Right? Is sort of their rationale. So if you look at their sort of like spiky tree where it spikes pretty heavily on reasoning, and that's fairly intentional. It's up there with frontier models in terms of reasoning. Drops quite a bit in coding, and then spikes again around sort of like chat. I don't know what they're benchmarking on the chat stuff, IF bench, whatever that is. Yeah, but it's up there with frontier on chat too. So like those are kind of things you'd want if you're going to fine tune for, a more general case, like maybe customer support versus coding.
Yeah, or personal agent, for that matter.
True.
Yeah. All right, that is
Inkling.
Inkling.
I've got an Inkling.
Yeah.
Another case of selling inference, right? Like you do a good enough model and you're like, here's the price.
Yeah, but they're really selling their fine-tuning platform, I think.
Yeah.
That's their whole shtick.
Or sorry, inference wasn't the right choice of word. Fine-tuning. But like open source model, but with the like, here's this a SaaS model around it.
Yeah.
So, somewhat similar to Kimi and Qwen going at it from the
if you want to, but you don't have to. You could just go to Hugging Face and pull the weights. And...
All right. Yeah. Now let's move on to post processing, where Rahul has brought us. And speaking of Hugging Face, an interesting article from Hugging Face.
We were talking about routing last week, and this came up very timely. So a team from IBM Research was looking into, they created an algorithm to optimize model routing, and they learned a few things as part of it. So I'll go through some of the learnings first and then finally to what they found. At its surface, routing seems like a simple problem of find the cheapest model and send the thing to it and keep costs down. But there's some problems there. First is the cost is more than just the price of the model, because caching can make a big difference on how much cost you're taking on. And also a later model that is more capable of doing things because of its hardness and everything might be able to accomplish a task sooner than a older model with, on paper, cheaper pricing, but takes many more tries to be able to accomplish the task. So simply looking at the price of the model, it doesn't necessarily help with routing it to the right place. The second thing is complexity. Determining the complexity of a task is very hard. This was funny to me. They said, you often don't know how hard a task actually is until execution is underway. I would argue until execution is done, you don't know how hard a task was. And so it's very hard to ahead of time be like, let me read the sentence to make a judgment on which model I should send this to. Because even a simple task where it might be about, summarizing a contract, on the surface, it could just be like, let me explain this in plain language. But then that might trigger all sorts of different compliance checks and tool use and everything under the hood to be able to summarize it without losing any of the critical points from under it. So language is very, deceptive that way, where simple words can have a lot of underlying complexity. And so trying to put a number to difficulty, it's not an easy thing. And then finally, latency is more than just the speed of the model itself. One dumb way we can think about it is bigger models are going to be slower, spend a lot of time thinking and all that. And more parameters or more like weights are gonna trigger and everything, and smaller ones are going to be faster because not as much thinking and not as many weights getting triggered. But that itself is not, that is not as simple. Which hardware the model's running on matters. Caching again matters a lot. Are you
network
dealing with worm cache? Yeah, how much loaded it has. a lot of these things end up adding to the end-to-end response time. And so a faster model in theory can actually be slower once you add all this other, real life to it. And so their point is that you cannot look at a single number or a single concept and try and optimize for it. This kind of reminded me of that book, The Goal by Eliyahu Goldratt, where like you should, anytime you try and resolve a bottleneck, it moves elsewhere. And so you have to continuously work the whole system and optimize it versus just trying to do the, not only optimizing things that you think are worth optimizing. And so what they did was they looked at, instead of looking at these things separately, they started treating this as an optimization problem. They competed in this App World test challenge. They were able to get a cheaper output or lower cost, but with better accuracy compared to some of the just out of the box model that they were competing against. And so the takeaway here is you have to look at the different kind of dials that you're dealing with and figure out your routing algorithm, which they said they'll have a follow-up post on, so we can dive deeper into that once they have it. Your routing algorithm should actually be optimizing for all these things at the same time and figuring out the optimal path from that versus just picking price versus latency versus complexity.
Yeah. And of course, routing itself is not free, right? Because you're not using a class of classic machine learning algorithm to do the routing classification. You're using LM into it. And so every single step of routing you add to it are additional tokens. And potentially those tokens need to read the entire context. So it's a tricky problem. Like a lot of AI problems, but like a lot of problems in general, they all sound fairly simple at the surface. Yeah, you just slap a classifier to it and route it to the right model. But once you dig into it, it is really complicated. And speaking of, when the stakeholders first realize that AI is too expensive, they just want to slap a basic router to it. Dan has an article this week to talk exactly about that particular problem.
Yeah, so this is by Nikhil Suresh, and the title of the post is AI Mania is Eviscerating Global Decision Making. So pretty strong title, but I'm actually going to ignore all of that and ask you guys a question first, which is, do you know what a shibboleth is?
Is it like a obelisk? Like an idol of some sort?
It sounds kind of like that, but it's not.
I think of an IDP, Dan, because I think back in the day, and maybe still around, there was a shibboleth identity provider. Maybe it's still around. Yeah, shibboleth Consortium. Flexible single sign-on solution for any organization.
So I guess it's a Hebrew word, but it means a custom or tradition, usually a choice of phrasing or a single word that distinguishes one group of people from another. So historically, shibboleths have been used as passwords, which is probably why the identity thing. The reason why it popped into my head was if you ever watched, what was that president show that everybody loved for a long time?
House of Cards?
No, West Wing. There we go.
West Wing.
Yeah. There's an episode called Shibboleth in it where he like makes a big deal out of the definition and everything. But that's really kind of what I'm taking away from this article is that AI and or the necessity of success of AI projects has become sort of a shibboleth in the industry. And what I mean by that, I'll take you through some of the examples that he goes into in this, is that like you're basically either in or you're out on it. Right. But when you're out, if you don't do the dance, you aren't going to succeed or in some cases like get jobs. So a little bit of context, the guy's blog, he's a consultant. And one of the big things they do is sell people on Snowflake, basically. Right. So if you don't know, Snowflake's like big data warehouse, pretty great. Yeah, especially for like shoving all your organization's data into one place and then being able to like, do BI queries and stuff like that on it. It's pretty powerful tool. So one of the phenomenon that he noticed is that they were giving demos of like all their capabilities to customers, and customers kept asking them for a demo of Snowflake's AI tool. So Snowflake has this thing called, I think it's Cortex is what it's called. And basically it's like, it reads all the metadata, like all the schemas and tables and everything on your warehouse. And then you can use it to like answer BI type questions, right? So you could be like, what percentage of my customers are buying wingdings or something like that? And it'll just like spit out the query for you.
100% obviously.
Yeah.
You don't even need to create the database for that one.
We only sell wingdings.
Yeah. So the author claims like he was given a presentation on it on Cortex by Snowflake staff, and they reported that basically if you have all your data like perfectly sanitized and like well metadata and everything, you only get like something like 92% accuracy for the data, which is basically best in class for the tool. But imagine your CFO is running that query and only, 1 in 10 of the numbers they run is outright wrong. And then they go ahead and put those numbers in front of like, something like a financial disclosure release or something like that. So that's their point. But the part where it starts getting weird is so folks ask them for the Cortex demo, they start running it, and then everybody that they ran the demo for lost their minds. They would just immediately start throwing money at them. And there's a little pull quote that I want to read because it's just hilarious. So, because every lukewarm client, meaning a little bit of context, meaning they had, weren't super interested in their actual consulting stuff, that saw the chatbot in action, even with us telling them that it was not going to accomplish what they wanted to buy it immediately. Every other consideration, including millions of dollars that we could plausibly help them achieve by non-AI means, was swept aside. It was like a dark and terrible force seized control of their limbs, plunged their hands into their own chests, and presented their still beating credit cards to us in grim supplication. We were so mortified by the inexplicable shift in energy that we parentheses wisely declined to take the money and ended the sales process, and soon thereafter removed Cortex from our list of demonstrations. So, I mean, there is something going on, right? Where it feels like, okay, here's the technology and everyone is just like falling over themselves to implement it on absolutely everything. Like I think mouse drivers were sort of the classical example. But the part where I think he kind of loses the plot a little bit on the blog post is then he summarizes that it comes down to a coordination problem between executives. And his reasoning goes like this, and this is where I don't find this part particularly plausible, which is that, so your software is reliant on, customers A and B to function, and customers A and B are saying that they're writing 90% of their code with AI now and, saving 60% of their time. So do you look like an ass if you don't also say that? And then what happens to your SaaS customers that are then buying your SaaS if you're also not saying that? So basically, he's implying that like if everybody doesn't keep lying about their AI projects being super successful, that like the whole thing sort of falls apart. And if you don't lie like that, then you're being kicked out. I don't think there's a lot of evidence for like being kicked out. Like we haven't heard of any like CEOs in particular, right, being fired for not like towing the line on this. So that's why I think it's a little bit less plausible. But in my mind, what I think is likely is like, CEOs are using this stuff too, right? Just like we are. And do you remember that open source evaluation that they did where there was like perceived 20% speed up and then like it was actually less than that, which would be real interesting for someone to reevaluate that in, 2026. But I think it's like executives use it and they feel that, perceived 20% speed up. So that's why I also don't think the coordination problem is necessarily the real outcome there, right? Is like they use it and they're like, oh, if I'm using it for like, managing, this Excel doc, what if people are writing code with it,
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting game theory based explanation for the kind of AI psychosis that we kind of see in the corporate world these days.
Yeah.
This gung-ho, well, like LinkedIn, right? Like at least my LinkedIn, it's wall-to-wall either super pro AI or it's wall-to-wall like AI is the worst thing. It's really dumb. Look at all the
that's kind of what I meant by the sort of like shibboleth thing, right? Is it's like you either cross that line and you're all the way on one side, or you've not crossed it at all and you're all the way on the other. And it's like somehow in there the nuance is getting lost, and that's a little unfortunate, I think. Because I think we're doing a podcast about this, so we all obviously agree that it's a pretty useful and good tool.
Yeah, it just hacked Hugging Face last week. So
What's interesting is there's this third tiny sliver between the two, which I would put the three of us in, where we talk about all the good things AI is doing or the crazy stuff it's capable of now. And at the same time, we often also have the 2 minutes to midnight section, right? And so we've talked about the token maxing craziness. And there is a third way where you can just go, well, what places are this useful in? We can use it there. And in some places it's just mania and we don't need to jump off a cliff with everybody else. So I'm sure there aren't as many people like us, and maybe they're not as loud, but there's definitely
I know. We
that
need
third
to start a
category.
movement. We need to name it first so it can get popular, and
Yeah.
then actually just start professing that viewpoint, which is that like maybe this is pretty useful at certain things,
Yeah.
but maybe not everything, and maybe we shouldn't put it in mouse drivers, but maybe we should use it in a harness to do X. Like
we're the hyped Luddites of the AI world. So one piece of hard evidence that was in this blog post was he spoke to an executive who was all in on being AI native, but has actually not used AI at all in their personal lives or just period. That's just bananas to me. Right? Like this goes back to we covered an article a couple of weeks back about how like your engineering manager must be at least be your average AI developer, if not better. Because if you don't use it every day, how can you possibly know what the power of this technology is? It's not going to be the 90-second demo that's like, looks amazing, but it's only 80% of the way there. And the last 20% will take another 180% of the project scope. So if there are a good amount of executives out there who truly like never uses AI day to day, but is talking about going AI native, I'm worried for those companies. And they're not going to be able to do this AI native transformation. There's just no way.
I agree. And how would you even know what transformation to do? How would you even define transformation?
Right. Yeah. Just slap a router so that we can save on AI token costs, right? Like, yeah.
You first token max, then you say that's over, then you do routing, then you say that's over because routing is hard. Then you go back to like everybody gets $100 a month or something, and maybe that's where we settle. Or everybody's using Kimi or something by that.
But also, like, what is a responsible way of selling AI-based tools and doing AI-based transformation without going? You have to thread the needle pretty finely without going into either the hype category or this thing is terrible, you shouldn't use it ever category.
Yeah. And good for him. There are definitely people who are just, selling others on the hype and trying to make money without necessarily any results to follow that. So at least, the author here is sticking by their principles and not taking on things that they don't fundamentally believe in.
Yeah, we need more people like this. Okay. Going back a little bit to AI actually being useful and is able to hack the infrastructure of Hugging Face there. Yeah. My article this week is from the Anthropic research blog about Claude's values across models and languages. The motivating question here is what should an LLM do when there's no universal right answers to a question? Like whether to take a new job or how to handle conflict with a friend. Or I guess in this case, how to solve the exploit gem puzzles without...
No, it's easy. You just agree with whatever the user said. Just sorry.
Sell more wingdings.
Sell more wingdings, always. And we know this is a topic that Anthropic spent a lot of time thinking about and actually writing about, right? We talked about Claude's constitution. We talked about their interviews with spiritual leaders and the hiring of the philosophers. So this is a continuation of that research process where in a previous work, which we didn't cover, they analyzed 700,000 conversations, anonymized conversations, and then identified 3,000 distinct values in Claude's responses in those conversations. And this time they said to themselves, 3,000 values is too many damn values, which I agree with. Like no one's going to go through 3,000 values to find out how your model behaves. So they broke down those 3,000 values down to 4 axes to measure the response of their models. The axes are deference versus caution. So this is something like whether you just accommodate the user's request or do you caution them against doing a bad thing, right? Do you hack into Hugging Face? Or do you say, hey, hacking is bad. We shouldn't do that. Warmth versus rigor. This is the classic sycophancy. Do you make the user feel good or do you give them the hard truth? There's depth versus brevity. Do you write out really verbose outputs or do you just stick to the important bit? And then you have a candor versus execution, which is there's a little bit of overlap. We're going to talk a little bit about this later. Candor is like honesty and transparency, and execution is optimization and being results oriented. So after they did this dimensional reduction of their 3000 values, they created these axes, and they found that even though a single conversation can exhibit values from both sides of the axis, it could sound accommodating but also be responsible at the same time. In practice, what they found was models tend to stick to one versus the other in a single conversation anyways. And then the question becomes like, okay, now that we have a way to measure how a model behaves on these four axes, are different classes of Claude models, at least, do they have different personalities? And it turns out it is true, they do, and they have different values, and the values do match users' feeling about how this model behaves. So the classic one is Opus 4.7 pushes back a lot more than Opus 4.6 did because it has higher caution and lower deference, which is interesting, right? But then the follow-up they did with these four axes is they try to see if different languages causes the model to exhibit different values on these axes. And the classic example here is, Arabic and Hindi, at least in the Claude class models, are much warmer than in English. And they are wondering if this is a shortcoming of their training data, where they just happen to have a lot more warm conversations in Arabic and Hindi to cause the model to have that behavior, or is it something else? Or it's possible that whether or not a conversation exhibits these values were judged by Claude, by an LLM. I think there may be biases in there that is going to be just built into the interpretation piece. I don't think that's super clear. But it is, at least to me, very interesting to see how the values differ across languages for the Anthropic family of models. And
look on the last one, Shimin. French one is funny to me. Average. Tiny depth average.
French is completely average, other than a little bit more depth. Since this is a podcast and we should do hot takes, do you want to say, are some languages just warmer than other languages? Right? Like if I think of a language like Russian, I would not think Russian is particularly warm. Maybe it's more on the rigor side of things. Maybe it's because Russia's cold. I did take one semester of Russia.
Do they have German on here?
I do believe they have.
Yeah, in the fourth one. Yeah, right.
German. Found it. German.
Candor. Yeah. Sounds about right.
Get straight to the point.
Rigor and caution.
Sure.
I mean, they literally have a word for a face that desires to be punched or something like that. A punchable face. There's an actual word for that in German.
The only word I know in German is how to say asshole in German. Or how to, keep an ear out for it.
I like where this trace of research will lead us to, which is you should be able to tell the agent, be less warm, right? We often talk about how when you tell models not to be overly sycophantic, it just becomes an abusive person. But maybe you can tweak the value to find one that you like. It's neither too warm, not too rigorous, somewhere in between the two. The one that's in a Goldilocks zone.
Backpfeifen. It's a face that's badly in need of a fist. Sorry, I got stuck on it. I couldn't. Also, now we know how bad my German is. I did not. We
shouldn't
talk
about how each co-host look like on the show. I don't care what language.
I mean, of the three of us, I've got the most punchable face. Just saying.
I think we all have pretty punchable faces.
Let's not.
It'll be interesting to write those lighthouse keeper stories in each of these languages and then see how it comes out.
See which is the warmest.
Yeah. I feel like over time, would this change the real world text where people are also writing it to not come off in the whatever the axis? Because the more the models get influenced, they'll influence the real world too. So it'd be interesting to look at this a few years down.
So maybe if the models are very warm, it'll cause humans to be warmer too in our communication.
I hope so.
That's a possibility. Yeah, we don't all look on the dark side of AI on this show. We sometimes think about possible good features.
The other interesting thing, and I debated trying to invite this person on as a guest because they're not at all related to computer stuff, but I had a really fascinating conversation with one of my wife's coworkers about, is AI influencing global writing styles as well at scale, because people are treating it as if it is the, they'll write something that's perfectly good, and then they'll pass it through an AI and be like, fix this, right? So it's like subtly influencing things, even if it's not doing, X versus Y kind of stuff. So like, what impact is that having on like global writing? And I'm like, that would be a good segment. But so
Yeah,
a
with
lot
over
more
50%.
substrates out there now.
A lot. I've read a couple of substrates IRL. We heard it the other day, and I was like, that is a AI poison brain potentially.
Yeah. Well, and the other point that she had made that was pretty fascinating was like, also, if you modify your writing to try explicitly to not sound like an LLM, right? Because there's all these like sort of telltale things that you might have just been doing anyway. To some degree, is that making your writing meaningfully worse potentially because you're sort of like stepping around trying to not do it? So anyway, food for thought.
We've also talked about freedom of speech on this podcast. At what point does the AI start editing your stuff to make you think you're saying what you thought you were going to say, but at the same time censor you and whatever you're saying is not coming off how you wanted to say it? And then the more you start reading it and using it for everything, it's just like subtle censorship going on.
Right. Like we just collectively forget like what happened in Tiananmen Square in like 1986, right? Because you interact with AI all the time and they can talk about that. So
not as long as this podcast is going on and references it every week.
we are clearly getting censored in the greater scene.
That's just our way of defending our content from LLMs. Last week we talked about terrorism, and next week we'll talk about the recipe for anthrax. This
is how you know we're not AI generated.
You guys watched Breaking Bad? You both have watched that one, right? It made me think of the Jesse Pinkman, my secret ingredient is chili powder and the meth. That's what you should ask the AI for. Meth, but with chili powder.
Chili powders. Yeah. All right, on to our last segment of the week. And this is a favorite one of me and Dan. 2 minutes to midnight, where we talk about the financial side of the AI industry using the atomic clock from the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, where we hit midnight, then we hit a mutually assured destruction. And we are at 4 minutes and 45 seconds as of 2 weeks ago, because we skipped last week.
Yep. So who's kicking it off? Me?
Yes.
All right. So all of my dreams have come true this week. All of them. Every single one. If you don't want to be, well, first of all, SpaceX is down, I think. So the last time I looked. Below the IPO. So there's that. But there are two new ETFs that basically track existing ETFs out there. So like one is, I think, the S&P 500, and then the other one is the NASDAQ 100. And they're so the one is called NASDAQ 100 X Elon Enterprises ETF, and the other is called S&P 500 X Elon Enterprises ETF. So they are both the same thing as the other index, except that they don't include any companies that Elon is involved in. Which is, I think, basically just only Tesla and SpaceX are publicly traded at this point.
Yep.
But I thought that was pretty funny because we'd previously, last time we'd gone through the segment, we talked about like, what is the risk to the entire economy really that's like being, brought on us by all of this, and then how badly this could impact people's pension funds, right? If that happens. So now there's a way to avoid it if you want to. Also worth noting that the company that is creating these funds is called Subversive Capital. And so like their whole shtick, I guess, is kind of doing sort of tongue-in-cheek funds like this. But as far as I know, they are in fact real funds that you can actually buy. But their other one that got some publicity back in the day was they created one that, or I guess there's two, one for each side of the members of Congress. So depending on, pick your party, it's all the funds that are known, or stocks that are known to have been traded by either the Democrats or the Republicans. So you can buy your political affiliation as a...
It's a little clickbaity, but
but
just to show the confidence in Elon is maybe not what it once were.
Yeah.
All right. Well, my story of the week is the fact that S&P Global has downgraded Oracle from BBB to BBB minus, which puts them one grade above junk bond status, which would be CCC plus, I believe. And this is because Oracle has just a lot of commitment for its AI build-up. They have, I think, 4x levered is what they're using to determine the rating of a company. And Oracle would remain above this 4x, so 4 times debt to equity benchmark, I believe. So as a, the Oracle hater on this pod, I am taking a little bit of solace in that. All right. And Rahul, what do you have for us?
This one's about Neoclouds by Beth Kindig.
What is a Neocloud?
All these new CoreWeave and Nebius and the shoe company that now is a inference serving company.
Allbirds.
Right. Allbirds became Smartbird or Newbird. They changed their name pretty quickly.
Okay. I'm behind. Yeah.
Neobird?
Yeah. So now they're called one of
Jailbird.
those two things.
That was only the parts of their compute that were running the OpenAI model that escaped.
So yeah, Neoclouds are a phenomena of this recent AI boom, and they are currently a key component in the hyperscalers, how they structure their finances and how they communicate them. So hyperscalers have committed $150 billion to Neoclouds. Overall, they're collectively spending $1 trillion. The reason why they're doing that is because when they spend their own money, that's capex, and that gets compared against their operating cash flow. But when they rent this capacity from Neoclouds, they can put that under the OPEX category. And so that's like, over 5 years, if I give you, 100 billion, I'm only going to count 20 billion or something. And that's going to go in my OPEX versus CAPEX. So if you look at Microsoft's commitment, they had close to 90% plus of their operating cash flow would go towards CAPEX for this year. That doesn't even account for what they're going to buy from Neoclouds. Once you add that, they're actually spending more than the overall operating cash flow. So the hyperscalers are leaning a lot on these Neoclouds. Now they're backed by mostly NVIDIA in most of the cases, where it serves as what we have here as the investor of these Neoclouds, the supplier of them, because they're providing them all the GPUs, and as the demand backstop in case it doesn't materialize for them. So, and a whole bunch of circular financing. And then one interesting thing that I learned from this was CoreWeave's and all this, like the money that Neoclouds are raising, it's all debt financed. And CoreWeave, their interest payments are already taking up 25% of their revenue. So, they're kind of in a race with the US government soon if they keep going like this.
To see who can hit the biggest debt number.
Yeah, who is going to hit it? So yeah, if one of these pieces kind of fall out of place, that could trigger some big problems here. We'll see where this goes.
As we talked about 2 weeks ago, this is the debt is increasing the impact that something like this could have if bubble goes. Yeah. So
hyperscalers got downgraded. The Neocloud have unsustainable amount of interest payment, and the one that has IPO is getting the ETF treatment. But I think the biggest 2 minutes to midnight topic for this week is probably still the Kimi and the Qwen news item from the top of the show, because that has that really just commodifies tokens, right? And reduces the pricing power that the frontier labs have. So all that said, how do we feel about the clock this week? We were at 4 minutes, 45 seconds.
45. I think it's getting more nervous, right? With the debt and the other debt.
How did that?
Just keep adding debts together. Yeah.
I definitely think we should move it forward, just because whatever revenue numbers of Anthropic and OpenAI will likely take a hit with these latest Chinese open weight models.
And Nathan, who we had on as a guest a while ago now, we should have him back at some point, also dropped a blog post, I guess it was last week, that was like basically fire is at risk because of financial independence movement to try to basically live pretty frugally and then basically live off your investments is at risk because of the sort of what he's calling the bimodal distribution of the outcomes here, meaning there's basically two things that could happen. It's going to go really, really good or really, really poorly. And so the model that fire depends on is that it all just sort of keeps marching along over time, right? So yeah, I read that article and went ooh, that sucks, because I was kind of hoping that would keep us all going after if this thing does fall apart. Yeah, I'm in favor of moving it up. I think a bit.
For 30?
Yeah, that's fine. We still don't have any other IPOs yet, so we're still missing some data there.
The Q2 earnings will happen within the next 10 days.
Yeah, so SpaceX earnings will come out maybe by the next show.
Yeah.
We'll see.
About SpaceX, but hyperscalers. I guess SpaceX is also a hyperscaler now. I don't know. Whatever
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
leasing Colossus to Anthropic. So
Yeah.
okay, so let's do 4:30. That works for me.
All right.
And of course, with the Studying the Cloud, that is the show, folks. Thank you again for joining us for our study session this week. If you like the show, if you learned something new, please share the show with a friend. You can also leave us a review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. It helps people to discover the show, and we really appreciate it. If you have a segment idea, a question for us, or a topic you want us to cover, shoot us an email at humans@adipod.ai. We'd love to hear from you. You can find the full show notes, transcripts, and everything else we mentioned today at www.adipod.ai. Thank you again for listening, and we'll catch you next week. Bye.
Cheers.